On this episode, we visit a traffic safety festival in Richmond, Virginia. A grassroots movement is trying to put teeth into Virginia's crosswalk laws. Experimental crosswalk signs are being used in Madison, Wisconsin. We look at the costs and benefits of traffic calming. And finally, we compare two arterial roads in Richmond. Stay tuned. We're in Richmond, Virginia, talking with Anthony Jones, who's Executive Director of the Endicott Community Association. What is the Endicott Community Association?
The Endicott Community Association is a grassroots organization of neighbors working together. We don't live very far from here. This is our neighborhood. This is a park. This is our park in the neighborhood, and we've been together now for about 10 years. And our purpose is to do whatever we can to help make life better in our inner city neighborhood.
Lots been going on here today. What's been happening?
Well, for one thing, I've been worked almost to death, but I've enjoyed it. What we've had here today is a bike rodeo and traffic safety festival. It was a result of a partnership with the Department of Motor Vehicles and the grassroots organizations such as ours. This is the first festival of its type in this community, and as well as this is the first grant to be given to a grassroots organization in the state of Virginia, and we're rather proud of that. And this today has been a family event. A family event where families can meet together and kids can have a good time and learn about traffic safety, learn about public safety. It was a great way to bring the private sector together, the public sector together. I think we've just had a great time today.
And you had a lot of different setups all around the park.
Absolutely.
What were some of the different activities going on?
Well, we had actually 5 events. We had Radio Disney to come be with us tonight. We had a free cookout for all the kids and their families. We had a traffic safety tour. We had a poster coloring contest. And we had free giveaways throughout the day. Bike helmets, school supplies, and just a little bit of everything. Tide's Dirty. I'm sorry, I forgot to remember Tide's Dirtiest Kid in Richmond. We had a lot of great events today, so we had a pretty good time.
And you mentioned the grant you got was a little different than where'd the money for this come from, and how'd that work?
Well, this money actually is money that the Federal Department of Transportation doles out to states. And states use this money as a means of affecting life in the community. But DMV chose to use their money a little bit differently in this particular instance. What they were looking for was not just a 501c3 organization, such as United Way, that sort of thing, not at that level. What they wanted to try to get to was the deepest level possible, or the most basic level, which was the neighborhood. They knew about my experience in working with neighborhood communities and my activism in the neighborhood community, and they approached me about 2 years ago with the prospect. We took about a year of actually going through the community, finding out what the community want, what the community's needs were, and it became quite obvious that the community needed some more training, for lack of a better term, in very basic public safety types of things. You know, how do you correctly install a child seat? Well, we had a booth over here today that talked about that. Wearing your seatbelt, how to drive through a work zone. As you've driven through the neighborhood yourself, you see there's a lot of construction going on. Inner city kids are notorious for not wearing bicycle helmets. So we gave out close to 350 bicycle helmets today. So those are the kinds of things that we talked about, or things that we did today. But we also found out some things that we didn't know. For example, we had originally asked that the fire department come out and do the child seat training. But we found out that they couldn't do the seatbelt training because of, A, the liability issues, and plus the training was too costly. So as a result of this festival, we were able to overcome that barrier by simply talking with the folks at NHTSA and say, hey, look, if you want to do this, you want to do this right, there are some barriers that you have to get out of the way first. So it helped the federal government level, it helped the state level, and it certainly helped us here on the local level. So we were not only able to affect change and have some fun, but we were able to educate the public and have some fun too.
We're in Arlington, Virginia, talking with Anthony Collins of VIPP. What is VIPP?
VIPP is Virginians Interested in the Protection of Pedestrians. And it is a group that I've formed because there are no uniform state laws in Virginia protecting pedestrians.
And so, what are you trying to accomplish or to change that?
Well, what I'm trying to do is make sure that the drivers who are reckless, drivers who don't pay attention to pedestrians right of way, have to pay a price. The way it's set up in Virginia right now, there are no uniform state laws which make them pay a price for their irresponsibility. And I'm going to try to get as many petitions signed and as many members enrolled because they're power in numbers. And if I can get a lot of people interested, that we can convince the state legislature to pass a uniform state law which will protect pedestrians. Right now, 6,500 pedestrians are killed each year in this country, and there's really no reason for it. And because of the situation in Virginia where my wife walks to work, she crosses Quincy from Wilson Boulevard, Randolph. Every day I come home from work, and every day she tells me about another horror story about how drivers make a right on red without even looking to the right to see if there's somebody going to cross. Or when she crosses and she's in the middle of the intersection, a guy's making a left-hand turn, trying to beat the oncoming traffic, not paying any attention to her. This is how 6,500 people die in America.
And you've been listening to your wife's horror stories for years. What inspired you to go ahead and do the work to form an organization and try to make the changes like this?
That's a very good question. Last February, I was sitting down after dinner reading an article and about a couple, a married couple like my wife and myself. They take a walk every day after work to relax. And they were crossing Lee Highway from Harrison Street, and the man was killed. The wife was in the hospital for 5 weeks, had 2 operations, and now is a widow having to raise her kids. That really irritated me because I said to myself, unlike a war, unlike ideological causes, unlike economic causes like oil, there's no reason for a pedestrian to be run over. And I looked at the consequence, and amazingly enough, after I talked to her for an hour and a half, I found out that the driver was not charged with anything. And I was shocked. So I decided something's got to be done, and I went to the libraries, looked up the Virginia laws, and I discovered there are no uniform state laws in Virginia.
So specifically, what are the changes that your petition would make if the legislature acts on it?
Okay, the changes are as a result of what the district Commonwealth Attorney calls infractions. Infractions are considered in the state of Virginia to be over 90% of what happens when a right-of-way of a pedestrian is not honored. An infraction has a $30 fine, and if you go to court, it's a $28 court cost. So $58 basically is all it is, which is less than a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor for a pedestrian in this state would be considered if a pedestrian is physically threatened. So the question then is, if a pedestrian is almost run over, would he or she have the paper and a pen, and would she be together enough to be able to all stand up and write down the license plate number of the person who almost ran him over, and then find a lawyer, and then find out who did the driving, and then go to court? What chance would they have of success? I say very little, if any. So the changes I'm looking for are a driver, for example, who has -5 to 0 points, an excellent driver in the state of Virginia, who would be stopped for not yielding a right-of-way for pedestrians, would have at least a $500 fine, and if the judge would have the right to also impose a suspension. On the other side of the coin, if you're a driver with 1 to 6 points, that fine would go up to $700, and the idea of a suspension would still be at the judge's discretion, but would be more likely. And then the third level would be people who shouldn't be on the road, period. These people would have to pay at least a $900 fine and hopefully lose their license for at least half a year. So this is what I'm trying to do. It's either $58 the way it is today if you're stopped, or at least $500, and I submit that people are going to be more accountable for their actions if they know they have to pay a higher price. So that's what I'm trying to do in the state of Virginia.
And if someone wanted to get in touch with VIPP to find out about circulating petitions or find out what other way they could help, what's your mailing address?
It's P.O. Box 5281, Arlington, Virginia 22205. This is, by the way, I might add, since you mentioned the word any kind of help, this is a grassroots movement. If the people don't help, I won't have the ability to go to Richmond through my state legislature and my state senator to get this law passed. So it is literally a grassroots movement, and it is literally up to the people of the state of Virginia to make it work. And it should work. Why should you lose your wife, your husband, your brother, your sister because the laws have no bite? Why should anybody lose a loved one for such a silly reason?
We're in Madison, Wisconsin, talking with Arthur Ross, who's the pedestrian bicycle coordinator.
Morning, John.
Madison's had some experimental signs in the middle of the street. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Sure. There are a lot of areas in the country, New York State, Boston, and other areas that have been using a sign placed in the street reading variously yield to pedestrians and crosswalks. Sometimes it's a warning sign, sometimes it's a regulatory sign, sometimes it's somewhat of a mix. We wanted to do that here in Madison. Some citizens and some alder people had seen these signs in other areas and said, how come we're not doing that? When we told them it was a sign that wasn't in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, they said, well, how can we do it? And we actually applied to, there's a process where you can apply to the Federal Highway Administration for experimental status for signs, which is a process we went through, and we actually got permission from the Federal Highway Administration to do that.
And what are the steps in the process? I suppose you have a temporary experimental status, and then what happens?
Yeah, there's an experimental status, and to do that, we have to agree. We have to tell the feds what we want to do, what the sign is, what it's for, where we're going to use it. We have to do some before and after studies to show whether or not the sign was effective. Last year was our first year with the experiment, and we felt in Madison that the results were positive, and so we, in submitting our final report to the Federal Highway Administration, we requested to extend the experiment as well as to expand the experiment to a couple of additional locations. Let me just back up for a minute. The sign that we're using is a regulatory sign. One of the issues that I personally had with the manual is that we have a regulatory condition wherein motorists are required to yield to pedestrians in crosswalks, yet the only sign in the manual is a warning sign. So I felt a very strong need that when we did this, that the sign had to be regulatory in design. The other part of the experiment is the location of the sign being placed in the street as opposed to on the side of the street.
A lot of people might not realize that distinction between a regulatory sign and a warning sign. What is the distinction?
Well, a warning sign is like on your microphone here. It's the yellow or orange diamond shaped signs. In it, all those signs are intended to do is to inform the motorist that something might be a danger, a hazard to them, as opposed to a regulatory sign telling motorists what they need to do. Stop, stop sign, you have to stop here. A yield sign, you have to yield here. A speed limit sign, you cannot exceed this speed, no turn on red, telling you things that you can or cannot do. Whereas warning sign has no enforcement as part of it. Well, there's a crosswalk up ahead. There might be pedestrians crossing the street. They're typically used to warn motorists of things that could be a hazard to them that they wouldn't ordinarily be aware of.
And back to the placement of the sign in the middle of the street, what are some of the problems that people wouldn't automatically be allowed to do that?
Well, it's not a typical location where signs are placed. Typically, signs are placed outside of the street right-of-way so that a motorist isn't going to run into them, or they're placed overhead of the street on arms that are high enough so that trucks can get under them and stuff. Putting something in the street typically isn't done, except during things like construction projects where the street is being narrowed to allow the workers to do their work. So it's a unique placement of the sign as well, and one of the other things that we're testing is how well the signs hold up with that placement.
So you say that you've been fairly pleased with the results. What have the results been from there?
We've had the sign in 3 different locations in the city. One is right behind my office, so I can monitor it fairly regularly. The street that's being crossed is a crosswalk to the city's new convention center. There's also one of the major state office buildings adjacent to that. So there's a fairly heavy flow of pedestrians crossing the street there throughout the day. The second location is in a neighborhood business district where we have frequent pedestrian crossings again. There's a market on one side of the street and other stores on the other side of the street. The third location was at a high school where we actually installed a pedestrian median refuge island a couple of years ago, and wanted to see what the effect of the sign would be there as well. The results have been somewhat mixed. At the site by the convention center right downtown, we've had really good results. The before study, we had virtually nobody stopping, yielding to pedestrians to cross the street before the sign went in. After the sign had been in for several months, compliance was up to about 35%, which is a pretty tremendous increase. It's still only a third of the drivers, but it's very much improved. In the neighborhood business district, we saw a good increase as well, from about 2% to 10%. And that might really be the lower end of the threshold of where a sign like this might work. At the high school, where there's a big rush of students coming out in the afternoon, and then fewer students later, and then they kind of dribble in the morning as opposed to that big rush. There really wasn't any change. It was about 10% to begin with and about the same at the end. And I think the problem there is the continuity of the pedestrian presence. At the other 2 locations, there are pedestrians crossing the street throughout the day. At the high school, it's a rush in the morning and a rush in the afternoon, and then all summer long there are very few pedestrians there. And I think the sign needs to be placed in a location where you've got a fairly high frequency of pedestrian use throughout the day.
So what's the next step now? When do these signs become universally acceptable?
Well, the process usually takes a long time. The most recent example of a new sign coming into the manual actually wasn't a new sign, but a new color, the strong yellow-green for school crossings. And if memory serves me right, it took about 8 years for that sign to go in. So I suspect it's going to take a while. I think they're pleased with the results that we've had. I was very pleased that they granted us the experimental status, and I think they did that because I think there is interest. So many other areas are using it that something really needs to be done with it, and so I think we'll see it in the manual at some point, but it's probably going to take 5, 6, 8 years for that to happen. This is the beginning step. I would encourage other areas that are using the sign or that are interested in using the sign to petition to the Federal Highway Administration for that status, because that'll give them a really good sense of the interest for this sign.
We're in Victoria, British Columbia, talking with Todd Littman, who's director of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute. The Institute's taken a long, hard look at traffic calming. A lot of people, they hear traffic calming, they think speed bumps. What is traffic calming?
Traffic calming includes a number of strategies to reduce the speeds and volumes on streets. Over the last century, traffic engineers have used a number of strategies to encourage motor vehicle traffic to go faster and easier. Well, traffic calming often uses those strategies in reverse. So instead of widening roads there are a number of ways to make a road a little narrower and encourage traffic to go on the arterials rather than on residential streets. We've identified about 24 different types of traffic calming devices, each of which has its application. So when you think of traffic calming, it's important to become familiar with the full range, the full menu of traffic calming devices, and figure out which one really applies in a particular situation.
And in places where they have found the right type of traffic calming method and put it into place, what have been the benefits of doing that?
There are some very significant benefits. One of the most obvious is that reducing traffic speeds and volume greatly reduces the chance of accidents, of crashes, both between vehicles and vehicles and between vehicles and pedestrians or bicyclists. In a number of studies, we've found crash reductions on the order of 40, 50, 60%. In one study, the insurance companies found that implementing traffic calming had a 6-month payback in terms of their crash compensation costs. That is simply the cost to insurance companies of paying for the damages that occur in crashes. That's a very good, cost-effective investment.
So beyond the savings in property damage and injuries and those costs, what are some of the other benefits of traffic calming?
Well, traffic calming makes a community a nicer place to live or to work or to shop. It improves the value of the property. In some studies, where a street was traffic calmed, and researchers looked at the value of the property before and after the programs were implemented, property values often increase by 5, 10, 15, or even 20%. That reflects the value that people apply to having a nicer street environment, a street where they don't have to worry about the safety of their children, where noise and air pollution is reduced. So the benefits often justify traffic calming simply in terms of the increased property values. In other words, businesses and property owners should be willing to support traffic calming simply because it increases the value of their properties.
And as with everything else in life, you're trading off benefits with costs. What are some of the costs of traffic calming, and how do they compare to the benefits?
Well, of course there are costs, and it's important to take those into account. Obviously, one of the costs is simply the cost of constructing of implementing the street changes, which often involves constructing some new curbing. Mini roundabouts or traffic circles are a common traffic calming device. And so those typically are in the order of a few $1,000s per project. In addition, you're reducing the speed of travel. From the perspective of a motorist who's traveling through your community, it can add a few seconds, sometimes even a minute or two, to their travel time. And so it is important to take those into account. There are a number of ways of taking those into account, and we've used these different methods for assessing the value of a traffic calming project, comparing the costs and the benefits. And what we find is that even taking into account the costs and using very conservative estimates of the benefits, the costs tend to be very small compared with the benefits. The benefits are often an order of magnitude greater than the costs.
And traffic calming has been coming into vogue. We've seen publications from the transportation engineers and other groups about it. How widespread is the use of traffic calming in the U.S. and Canada?
Well, it's really a new idea. There was very little discussion of it more than a few years ago. And so the transportation professionals are having to learn about these concepts right now. There are some very good resources that are becoming available. For example, the Canadian Guide to Traffic Calming was just published last month, and it's an example of the good materials that are becoming that can now be used in developing a traffic calming program and planning specific projects. It requires a change in the way we think about transportation and streets. It means that we have to recognize that traffic imposes significant costs in a community, and that sometimes it's worthwhile to actually reduce the speed and the volumes of traffic in an area to maximize the benefits in a community. So one of the first things we have to do is educate both transportation professionals and residents about the various strategies that are available, the traffic calming strategies, what they look like when they're actually implemented and what their effects are.
Recently, we were in Richmond, Virginia, looking at conditions along two arterial roads. The first, Midlothian Turnpike, has major problems. Pedestrians are left to fend for themselves on dirt trails by the side of the road. To cross under the Chippenham Parkway, pedestrians are squeezed onto a narrow shoulder. To reach any of the numerous shopping centers along Midlothian, you have to walk across vast parking lots. To cross Midlothian is not a pleasant experience. The existing signals have no provisions for pedestrians and do not allow enough time to make it to the far side. There are some new sidewalks going in, but will they make it past the city line at Chippenham Parkway? The other arterial is Warwick Road. Recently, it was rebuilt with sidewalks. The sidewalks are set back from traffic by a planting strip with trees. The intersection with Broad Rock Boulevard has walk signs and crosswalks. One crosswalk even has a refuge island halfway across. However, there are problems with some of the details. Each corner has only one curb cut, pointing toward the center of the intersection. The corners also have a wide turning radius. In order for the two crosswalks to meet the single curb cut, they are several feet longer than the street width before the corner. Despite the length of the crosswalks, 3 of the legs do not have a refuge island. Also, pedestrians need to push a button for the walk signal, but there is no button for pedestrians who get stranded on the existing refuge island. Clearly, Warwick is better than Midlothian. Nevertheless, there is still substantial room for improvement.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.